We are your home theater and AV questions answered. This is AVRant. Want your home theater or AV question answered by Tom and Rob? Send it to question@avrant.com. Welcome to AVRant. I'm Tom Andry, and I'm here with
Rob H.
Mark. Mark's a bit divided about having replaced his NHT SuperZero speaker setup with an RBH Impression Series. Wow, I messed up RBH. I think I deserve 3 lashes for that one. On the plus side, the Impression Series are beautiful, and there's no issue in terms of spouse acceptance factor. They can play a bit louder and a bit lower, but he can't use a center speaker because it's too physically wide for his available space. On the negatives, he doesn't think there's that much of improvement versus his NHT SuperZeros plus a sub, and the RBHs actually seem to have a bit more roll-off in the highs than the NHTs. Furthermore, had in his mind that he wanted to listen to 2-channel stereo in direct mode. He has an Emotiva UMC1 processor. He's been looking forward to using the tower speakers with the Emotiva in direct mode for stereo. When he tried it out, he heard distortion. And when we switched it back to just stereo listening mode, the distortion went away. So is all this normal? Was he expecting too much from the RBH towers, or was there maybe something defective with his pair?
So I want to say that overall, what you're describing is pretty normal.
Yeah.
The only thing that's giving me pause is that mention of the distortion. So the RBH towers, the Impression Series towers, they can play crazy loud. You're probably not anywhere close to how loud they can actually play.
Right, sure.
But they don't play that low, which is actually a reason I like them. Because I'm like, no matter what your speakers are, you ought to be crossing them over to subwoofers. We'll get into your whole 2-channel and direct thing in a second. But yeah, overall what you're describing is kind of normal because the NHT SuperZeros are really darn good speakers. Right? The one drawback they have is that they're small, they're sealed, and therefore they can't play exceedingly loud.
Right.
But otherwise, they're darn good, which is why I've been recommending them for years and years and years. Tom's been recommending them even longer than I have. So,
and the reason why, I mean, you can almost, and this is a good example of when you can look at your reviewer and say, okay, what is this reviewer like? And so when they say they like something and they also like another thing, what am I expecting things to be completely different?
Yeah, they're probably not worlds apart, right?
Right, and that's what you're finding right here. I like the RBH Impression Series. I also like the NHT SuperZeros. Now, in the right room, either one makes sense. And if I don't know, did he ask us about this upgrade before he did it?
Yeah. Except I think we answered it when you were away, so it was Lee and myself. I think that was one of the times. He was saying yeah.
Go ahead.
No, he was just saying he had a budget. He wanted to upgrade his NHTs. He wanted something that could play louder and lower. I was like, well, RBH Impression Series fits that bill. And it's not as though what he's saying is, far away from that. He's just like, oh, it's not actually that big of an upgrade. But he's mentioning it was like NHT SuperZeros with a subwoofer versus the RBH towers without a subwoofer. And that's a pretty big deal.
That is a big deal. So, I mean, if I had been part of that conversation, I would have said, this is going to be a more, you're getting what you want, which is lower and louder. But you're not going to see that there's a huge amount of difference between the upper. And it's easy for me to say that now that you've already said it. So I won't take any credit for that. But Rob's absolutely right. You cannot compare the apples of NHT and a sub to the oranges of the Impression Series by themselves. They're not meant to play. They can play lower. They can.
Yeah, they can play lower than the SuperZeros. But
they're still not a subwoofer.
For the size of them, they have surprisingly little deep bass, which I am a fan of. They used all of that driver area to go loud rather than low. And I'm a fan of that design choice, but not everybody is.
Yeah. Now, to go into that being said, okay, so now you've got these speakers, so you're not, you're kind of questioning whether or not you love them. And I can understand that. The sort of buyer's remorse thing that you have going on right now, I can completely understand. I made the mistake of Googling the bicycle I bought this weekend after I bought it.
Jeez. You don't follow your own advice.
As I was doing it, I was like, you shouldn't be doing this, Tom.
Do as I say, not as I do.
No, it's not true. It's not true. And I was not displeased with what I saw. I was not displeased with what I saw. And in the end, it didn't really matter because me buying a bicycle, which I haven't ridden a bicycle since the last time I rode one, it had to be 20 years ago. 20 years ago was the last time I physically got on a bicycle for any length of time. And before, it was another 10 years before that, was the last time I owned one. I wasn't going to be able to tell the difference between one and another. I just went with the one that felt the best for me and seemed to ride the best for me, and was the one I liked the best out of the 3 that were available in my price range, or 4 that were available in my price range in town. And I'm not buying something online that I can't ride before I do it, right? Here is the same sort of situation. You went on the advice of others. You asked, you were looking for some changes. I knew only the few parameters I wanted in the bike. I wanted the road bike. I didn't want this. I didn't want that. You wanted louder and lower. You got louder and lower. But then you're like, but there's no change to the top end. You're like, yeah, I'm not surprised. There isn't going to be that much of a change, because RBHs are very flat. They try to be flat. They try to be neutral. And the NHT SuperZeros try to be flat, and they try to be neutral. You can get, I can rattle off 5 other speakers that you could put in that same room and be like, they all kind of sound the same. Like, I know, that's great, isn't it? But RBHs are great because they are able to fill up a much bigger space. Do you need that? I don't know. But here we are, where this was the situation. The situation, the problem that really comes in is that you're trying to use the RBHs without a sub.
Yeah.
And that's
this
not fair.
whole idea of wanting to do 2-channel stereo in direct mode, just running the front towers full range, I would like to relieve you of that idea, is how I will put it. Believe me,
sounds like you're gonna slice it out of his head. If you were Hannibal Lecter, that would be very ominous, what you just said.
That's right.
Let me relieve you of this temporal lobe that you have.
This is something that we talk an awful lot about on this podcast, because you are so not alone, Mark.
No, you're not.
In fact, maybe this idea, got into your head because you've been reading a whole bunch of other people's opinions who have it in mind that the ideal, and you know what? You could have been reading stuff that Andrew Jones said, because he said stuff like this. The ideal is somehow full range speakers, no subwoofer necessary, that is somehow the best way that you could experience 2-channel sound, or surround sound for that matter. Some people have said that. That is something that Tom and I completely disagree with, because you are not listening outside and you are not listening in an anechoic chamber. You are listening inside a room, which means that bass sound waves, there is no way to avoid this when you have walls anywhere within 55 feet of you in any direction. There is no way to avoid sound waves in the bass that bounced between one or more walls before they ever reached your ears. You never hear the direct sound on those very low frequencies. Never. You only ever hear reflected sound when you have walls around you. And because of that, the placement of the things that create the bass, which we would use subwoofers to do that, is different from the ideal placement where your mid-range and treble should be coming from. So we strongly suggest always using subwoofers, at least a pair, quads if you can, but a pair of subwoofers can be great. But setting them up in your room so that you have nice, uniform, even, linear bass, and then you cross it over to some very nice speakers that can handle the mid-range and treble, which it sounds like this one thing about saying that when you played them full range there was distortion, that gives me some pause. Because
he's not telling me where the distortion is. If it's in the low,
if it's in the really low bass, like if he was like, I got some big towers, because they are big. Those RBHs are big. He's like, I got some big towers. I'm gonna put on some thumping bass, and that's what caused the distortion. Then I don't think there's anything wrong, because they will. Much like Kef's towers. If you try to make them play crazy low bass, they'll try to play it, but they'll distort when they do it. If that's what it was super loud, low thumping bass, and that caused the distortion, then I'm not worried. And it sounds like
screeching in the high end, though.
But he didn't describe that. And since he said once he put it in stereo mode and his subs were back in, all that distortion went away. It's really making me think the distortion was in the low bass.
Right. So. Yeah. If you want to have a 2-channel listening experience, just remember that the subwoofers are part of that. I don't care. First of all, you don't have full range speakers. Not only that,
right.
All you people listening to this podcast do not have full range speakers. the couple of you who are like, hey, I do, you might. But most of you, who even the ones who say, oh, I do, they're big. No, big is not it. Full range is 20 to 20. 20 hertz to 20 kilohertz. If your towers are not hitting 20 hertz, You don't have full range speakers by definition.
And if you're just finding it hard to get your head around, if you're saying, I still think that all the sound should come from one source, right? Because sometimes that's what it is, right? They're just like, all the sound creating things should be in one cabinet. That's the only way I can get my head around it. Do you have a problem with having both a tweeter and a woofer in your speaker? Do you have a problem with that? Because almost everyone would say no, of course. Every speaker that's a bookshelf or larger is going to have at least one tweeter and one woofer for the most part.
This is an audiophile crap speaker. It doesn't sound like crap.
There's effectively no difference between, well, now you've just added another driver. And you have the freedom to place this other driver that's producing nothing but low frequencies where you only ever hear reflected sound. You have the freedom to place that someplace else in your room, which we say is a fantastic thing. But if what you're having trouble with is wrapping your mind around the idea that you have this additional piece that wasn't part of one solid cabinet, it's effectively no different than having multiple drivers that are handling different frequencies. That's all. You've turned a two-way speaker into a three-way speaker, or a three-way speaker into a four-way. That's all.
These high-end, like Wilson Audio comes to mind, where they have each driver in a separate box, and they come into your house and they assemble it all together. Now, just imagine that's what your speaker is like, except one of them, you decide not to assemble it in the same spot because it's way too big, and you put it over in the corner instead. That's all it is. It's the same speaker. It's the same speaker. So, as far as your buyer's remorse, yeah, I feel for you here. I want you to love these speakers. They certainly have a lot going for them. They did give you what you wanted, which was louder and lower. Now that
not as low as you were hoping.
Yeah. Not as low as you were hoping,
which I get.
But I can understand that. But now you need to decide whether or not that's something you really needed. Because a lot of times we think, I know I do this all the time. I'm like, yeah, I need a car that can go faster. Now I live in Florida, and you think, well, what does that have to do with anything? We got a lot of old people in Florida, and they drive really slow, like all the time. So you can't. We have tons of traffic too. I see these guys run around these Lamborghinis, right? They are going 30 miles an hour most of the time. Do they need a Lamborghini to go 30 miles an hour? No. But sometimes they want it. And maybe that's what you want here. Maybe you're thinking to yourself, I want something that can play louder and a little bit lower, so that when I move to a bigger room, or I put these in a bigger room, I will have what I need, because the SuperZeros won't give me that. If that's the case, then your purchase was not for vain. You can still use those in the future. So just, get back to us. I'd like to hear the resolution of this. Want your question answered? Send it to question@avrant.com. This is AVRant.
Now go out and listen to something.